Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Melinda Nusafora. For more than 3 decades, Turkey has been embroiled in a war with the PKK terror group and its offshoots. Ankara has long warned that the war in neighbouring Syria would give the PKK an opening to expand its reach through its affiliate, the YPG. It's a group that the US has supported with arms and training against Turkey's wishes in its fight against Daesh. Recently, Turkey stepped up its attacks on YPG targets in northern Syria, while also conducting joint patrols with the US in areas where the terror group operates. Mixed signals coming from both sides have raised many questions for the NATO allies. James Kim explains.
For a brief time, it looked as if the alliance between the United States and Turkey was back on track. Roadblocks on both sides had been getting in the way of the NATO allies avoiding a diplomatic pileup. But in a show of unity, rarely seen of late, the two countries started joint patrols this month in northwestern Syria. Their military cooperation centers around the city of Manbij. It's a stronghold for the YPG, the Syrian offshoot of the PKK terror group. The United States has armed the YPG in its fight against Daesh, but Turkey opposes arming one terror group to fight another, and has warned the US its weapons threaten its security. Under a deal struck in June, the US has agreed to help keep the YPG away from Turkey's border. The joint patrols have given rise to a renewed sense of optimism among people in Manbij, who've been forced to leave their homes because of the fighting.
God willing, things will improve following understanding between our brothers the Turks and the Americans on Manbij. And God willing, we will return to our city and we will be one people.
But, like most relationships, things have become complicated. Turkey's offensive against the YPG elsewhere in Syria threatens to derail their joint efforts. Not too far from Manbij, Turkey has started shelling YPG targets east of the Euphrates River. Turkey has been fighting the PKK and YPG for more than 40 years. But their forces still control a large part of northern Syria. In 2016 and 17, Operation Euphrates Shield, launched by Turkey, focused on driving PKK and YPG terrorists out of border regions west of the Euphrates River. In early 2018, the Free Syrian Army, backed by Turkey, cleared the YPG from Afrin in Operation Olive Branch. These recent artillery strikes are targeting YPG hotspots to the river's east, around Kobani. The strikes have angered the United States, which in retaliation began conducting joint patrols with the YPG along the Syrian-Turkish border. Needless to say, it's a decision that has further complicated an already strained relationship that seemed to be on the mend.
Kabul edilebilir bir şey değil. Yani bizim bunları kabul etmemiz mümkün olmayacağı gibi böyle bir durum kesinlikle sınırda ciddi olumsuzluklara neden olur.
Washington is concerned Ankara's military actions could jeopardize the fight against Daesh in eastern Syria. But after such a prolonged campaign against the YPG, Turkey isn't backing down. James Kim, Straight Talk.
And joining me now to discuss this further, Hasan Yalçın, Associate Professor at the Istanbul Commerce University, and also on our panel, Navar Shaban, Analyst at the Omran Centre for Strategic Studies. Gentlemen, thank you for being here with Straight Talk. Navar, I'm going to start with you. Let's just begin by explaining to our audience why Turkey considers it so vital to keep the YPG away from its borders, particularly in this eastern Euphrates area.
Great. First of all, thank you. The situation always have been critical in this borderline for the Turkish side. They've been since a long time mobilizing some of its forces to secure its national security. Recently in this borderline cities and villages, a lot of problem occurred between the Kurdish side that running these cities and the Arabic. And this kind of tension in a way will affect the Turkish side. So
How? How does it affect Turkey's security?
There is some kind of relationship between these villages and the villages on the Turkish side. So anything, the security situation, when it become fragile in this area, it will eventually affect the Turkish side. So they don't have the Turkish side don't have the luxury just to keep it going as the way it is. So they had to, in a way, put an end to all this kind of like problem and incident happening in this area.
With that in mind, Navar, why are we seeing the United States supporting the YPG and, you know, conducting these joint patrols along the eastern Euphrates?
The American response is a bit shy in regard of this. They don't want, first of all, to upset the Turk. They have a good thing running in Manbij, and they are going to this next phase, which is like electing a local council, some kind of local council that run the city. They choose to run a joint patrol with the YPG SDF on the borderline, but that didn't stop the operation. It stopped it for like a couple of days, and then the Turkish continue targeting some of the villages. So in a way, they started, the American side did that just to say to the Kurdish side that we are with you, but in a way, this didn't affect the Turkish operation. It's just a very indirect response from the American side.
Hassan, let's bring you in here. It may have been indirect, but it did anger the Turkish side. President Erdogan came out quite strongly saying that this is not something that is acceptable. We see on one hand, Turkey and the United States working together with joint patrols in Manbij. On the other hand, we see them at odds over the YPG. How damaging is this situation for the NATO allies?
Yeah, it's quite damaging because Turkey has been fighting for more than 3 decades against a terrorist organization. And the center of that terrorist organization was located in northern Iraq. But right now we can say that the center of that organization, the political center of that organization, is moving towards northern Syria. So Turkey considers that as the #1 national security concern. So Turkey repeatedly asked the United States to cooperate on these kinds of issues. But the United States, as far as I understand, in the current government situation, there is no quite clear plan of what to do in Syria. That's why they don't want to just move away from PYD, because they had already built 22 military bases in northern Syria under the control of PYD region. And whatever the next plan, whatever the next move for the United States thinks that they will need this territory for any kind of operation. So
do you think that it's going to disrupt the Turkey-US alliance if we keep seeing them at odds over the YPG?
Yeah, the Turkish-United States relation is already disrupted. So we are actually trying to normalize this kind of relationship. Turkey, for a long time, waited for U.S. response, a positive U.S. response, but the United States rejected to make any concessions on this kind of an issue. So Turkey chose some other path to deal with Syria issue in conjunction with Russia and Iran. Under these conditions, the United States asks Turkey to cooperate again, to normalize some kind of issues, and they show Turkey that they can make some concessions. But these concessions are not real, are not some concrete concessions. They are just making some promises that was never kept until right now. And Turkish government right now thinks that there is no way the United States is going to keep its promises. They located themselves in the northern Syria, and they are just protecting PYD region. That's why normalization requires huge concessions on the U.S. side, not supporting a terrorist organization anymore, not giving military weapons to those organizations, to that organization. That's why even if you try small steps making the relations normalized, it's not going to work in the short run.
It's going to be definitely a long term, but we haven't seen those concessions yet. Let's look at the role that the United States has been playing in Syria. Of late, it's largely been left out of a lot of these joint summits on Syria. Do you think Turkey is purposely sidelining the United States?
In a way, They are and they aren't. Both of these countries, they have lots of things on their plate. The Americans still continue their so-called operation against ISIS and ISIS last pocket. They recently discovered that vanquishing ISIS from city and location does not mean that they got rid of ISIS. So not participating in summits that focus on other front is something isn't bothering the American a lot, because they already have lots of things going on the eastern Syria, on Tanaf. They had a problem with the Rukban refugee camp. There was a lot of pressure. Now they are like the YPG. They are trying to. They discovered that there is lack of strategy when it comes to YPG ground operation, because they simply couldn't finish the Al-Hajim pocket in Deir ez-Zor, which is a very small area, which caused the American to increase their airstrike. Again, it's another pressure, international pressure. So simply the Americans have lots of things going on their front in the eastern Syria. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Hassan, you mentioned in your previous answer that the relationship between Turkey and the United States has been disrupted, but recently we have seen them coming together a little bit more. There's been the easing of the sanctions after the release of Pastor Brunson, etc. Do you think the current situation in Syria could derail a lot of that good cooperation that we've seen in a broader sense between Turkey and the United States?
I tend to think that these incidents individually are not the causes of the disrupted relationship between Turkey and the United States. The real cause is that the United States is following a very aggressive foreign policy that rejects cooperating on significant issues. Turkey was a loyal NATO partner and repeatedly for a long time has asked to the United States to make cooperation in Syria. But as in the case of US relations with other traditional partners, US repeatedly rejects this kind of cooperation and cooperation ideas. Trump government made it in a more arrogant way clear to its partners that I'm just going to deal with my own national interests, but not with your national interests. That's why the problem is like a field over there, and all products of that field is crisis indicators. So Brunson issue, visa issue, F-35 issue, S-400 issue, these are not crises. These are not just outcomes of a field of crisis, a process of crisis produced by the United States. So even if you solve all these crises one by one, they are going to be recreated because of U.S. style of diplomacy right now in the world. This is not peculiar to Turkish relationship. This includes all American partners. So in the short run, you cannot expect that they are going to be solved. In order to solve these kinds of issues, before the United States should decide what's its foreign policy goal in Syria, or in general what's in Middle East, and in general what's in the entire world. Without an answer to that kind of a question, we are not going to be in a position to take, in the case of Turkey, what kind of a behavior can create cooperation.
Nawar, I want to ask you the recent developments with regards to the reward that the United States has put out there for 3 high-ranking PKK members, $12 million collectively. Is this an issue that the United States is genuinely concerned about, or is this just a way of them placating the situation with Ankara?
Simply, it's a PR stunt. If they cared about this situation, or this incident or this issue, they had to do these kind of steps a long time ago. So simply because what happened on the eastern side of Euphrates, the American had to do something that in a way ease up the relationship with the Turk. So they come up with this, and I think also in the future we might see them also tackling other members of the YPG, PKK, telling them, showing the Turkish side that we also are concerned about your national security and we are helping. Simply, in my opinion, it's a PR stunt from the American side, trying to make things smoothly with the Turk, at least until Minbij deal finish and we jump to another deal.
Hassan, do you agree it's a PR move?
Yeah, exactly. The main idea is that we are making some kind of concessions, but not on the PYD issue, but we are doing it on the PKK issue.
So they're tinkering on the edges.
They are still changing the target. They are making a target diversion behavior. And that's why Turkey does not consider it as a genuine way of making cooperation. Actually, the US repeatedly did the same kind of arguments, but Turkey is not anymore in a situation to make it seriously, to think that it's a serious concession.
Yeah, they certainly haven't been placated, not by a long shot.
It's already tried and it doesn't work, it's clear.
Hassan Yalcin, Nawaz Shaban, thank you so much for joining us on Straight Talk.
Thank you.
Thank you.
US President Donald Trump has made good on his threats to tear up the 2015 Iran nuclear deal and reimpose crippling sanctions. The latest measures were announced by US Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who also gave Iranian leaders a blunt warning.
The Iranian regime has a choice. It can either do a 180-degree turn from its outlaw course of action and act like a normal country, or it can see its economy crumble.
The Trump administration has argued that the sanctions will help cut billions of dollars from Iran's war chest, which has been used to fund proxy militias in Syria, Yemen, Lebanon and Iraq. But the US made exceptions for some of Iran's largest oil customers. 8 importers have been granted 180-day waivers that will allow them to gradually reduce their oil imports from Iran. Among them is Turkey, which imports nearly half of its oil needs from the country. The latest sanctions also target the country's banking and shipping sectors, which is expected to deal further blows to Iran's already battered currency, the rial. The reaction in Tehran has been one of defiance as protesters took to the streets to denounce the US move. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani echoed that message.
We're in a situation of economic war, confronting a bullying power. During that time, it was Saddam. Today, it's Trump. There's no difference. We must resist and win.
And to discuss how this could play out and what's at stake for Turkey and the region, joining me in the studio, Farhad Rezai, who is a political analyst and commentator, contributor with the Atlantic Council. And joining us from London, we have Mehrad Kansari, who is a former Iranian diplomat. Gentlemen, thank you both very much for being here with Straight Talk. Farhad, I'm going to start with you. Turkey gets nearly half of its oil from Iran. This exception that they've been given will only last 6 months. If it's not renewed, how does Turkey make up this shortfall, and what impact does that have on the Turkey-Iranian relationship?
Well, first of all, I think Turkey will find itself at the middle of 2 choices. First of all, it needs to resolve its problems with the United States, and then that will cause him, convince him to comply with the sanctions. And then there is another dynamic at play. There is no way that Turkey and Iran can get around sanctions, because we have here that the Americans have full information about the previous round of sanctions, that they could screw sanctions. Apparently, Reza Zarrab and the head of the Halkbank provided Americans with full information. So from that perspective, there is no way that Turkey and Iran can cooperate with each other.
So where does Turkey get its oil from then?
Oh yes, and then another. On the other hand, there is another dynamic at play, and that is Turkey gradually drifts away from the United States toward Russia and Iran. For Turkey, Iran and Russia seems to be a better fit than NATO. This is one factor. Another factor is that Turkey wants to have a stabilized Syria. This is also the goal of Iranians. So this dynamic might enable Turkey and Iran to cooperate with each other. That's why I'm saying that Turkey is at the middle of 2 choices. It's like a dilemma. So at the end of the day, it is Turkey's choice to choose which one should go for.
Mehrad, let me bring you in here. We've seen Iran and Turkey cooperating quite effectively when it comes to Syria. They've held a lot of joint summits and talks together. If Turkey does reduce its oil reliance on Iran, what kind of impact is that going to have on their relationship and then on the situation in Syria in general?
Well, I think that's a very unlikely scenario, you know, at the end of the day, because I think that there are too much stakes involved in Turkey's previous statements on the fact that it will not isolate Iran on this situation. I think has a great deal to do with it. But you have to bear in mind that on Syria, Turkey and Iran have not seen eye to eye on a consistent basis, although at this particular time I think they are much closer to one another than they were, let's say, 4 or 5 years ago. I think that obviously if there is tensions in terms of trade between Iran and Turkey, and Turkey abides by the provisions of the US imposed sanctions in a way that's detrimental to Iran, obviously it will cause friction for Syria in the Syrian equation as well. Although, as I said, I don't believe that things are likely to escalate in a negative way between Iran and Turkey, given the level of dependence that they have on one another.
When we look at Iranian oil, China is one of the major importers of Iranian oil. They've come out to say that they don't have any intention of following Washington's orders and completely stopping their import to zero. The US wants the imports of Iranian oil to be zero. China says we're not going to do that. Does that undermine these sanctions altogether if their major importer is happy to keep doing business?
Well, for China, everything is political. I mean, when it comes to Iran, everything would be political between China and Iran. I mean, if China could get something from Washington in exchange, definitely Chinese will comply with the sanctions. But if China's compliance with sanctions would send a kind of weakness signal to Washington, definitely Chinese will not abide by sanctions.
Well, Mehrad, let me ask you this then. If China and Washington do start playing ball and we do see China agree to reduce their Iranian imports to zero, what impact will these sanctions have on Iran? Are sanctions and economic strategies an effective way of getting Iran to change its behaviour?
Well, there's no question that the imposition of sanctions already, I mean, you don't have to bring Iran's oil export levels to zero in order to make an impact. The impact of the sanctions is already being felt. In fact, the impact of the upcoming sanctions were felt from the moment that President Trump announced that those sanctions were going to be reimposed, given the dive which the Iranian currency has taken in the last 4 or 5 months. But the question is that bringing Iranian exports to zero and cutting off Iran's income to zero, this is not a very likely prospect in the best of circumstances from the standpoint of the United States. And you have to bear in mind that over this particular issue, it's not just a question of bilateral relations between the US and China. It is a fact that the United States is isolated on the question of reimposition of sanctions against Iran, given the fact that the Russians, the Europeans, they are all not on board with the US policy and would try and assist Iran in ways that is possible in order for them to be able to manage. But the effects on the Iranian nation is significant. Economic growth forecasts have been severely reassessed. Iran will definitely have a negative growth rate in the coming year. The effects on inflation, employment, issues of this nature is going to hit Iran profoundly, and it will leave the Iranian government with the feeling that, you know, what is going to be at the end of the road? You know, that they may be able to survive, but can they provide long-term prosperity and economic growth and you know, things of that nature to their people for the future, unless they begin resolving these issues with the United States and some of its close collaborators over this issue?
Fahad, I'm going to ask you very briefly if you could just say whether you think these sanctions will be effective. Will it make Iran change its behaviour, do you think?
Well, this is actually questionable because Iran's security policies and Iran's foreign policy has no correlation with Iran's revenue. If you could look at the period of 2011 to 2015, which Iran was under the severe sanctions, Iran was more aggressive in Syria. Iran was more aggressive in the other countries, in Yemen. So actually, Iran's aggressive foreign policy is part of its forward defense. So it has nothing to do with its income. I mean, it's actually to offset Iran's weak conventional military. So I think this is not going to make any positive results for the Americans.
Fahad Rezai and Mehrad Kansari, thank you both very much for joining us on Straight Talk.
Thank you for having me.
That's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Melinda Nusofora. If you've got any comments, do share them with us on Twitter with #StraightTalk. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, take care and goodbye.